From the PEN studios, this is the Imperfect Moms Club with your hosts, Lisa and Brittany.
This week on Imperfect, we're talking about helping children deal with grief. Join us as Lisa does a special interview with Michelle from Good Grief Parenting.
Welcome to the Imperfect Moms Club.
Well, hi, Lisa. I'm so happy to be here. Yes, we've kind of had this scheduled for a little while, and it's fun to finally get together.
And I'm excited to talk about grief with you, about kids. So before we get into all that, if you could just kind of introduce yourself and tell us, who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm Michelle Benyo, and I'm the founder of Good Grief Parenting. And my background is as an early childhood parent educator. I became a parent educator in my mid-30s when I became a mom. I had some teaching and some communications and other careers in my background, but I just loved being a mom. And by the time I started doing my work as an early childhood parent educator, which is a program early childhood family education is a program we have here in Minnesota in every school district. And it just gave me a chance to be with parents of other young children like mine every day and, just navigate together parenting in those early years. And so I just loved that path. I loved that occupation. But just a few months after starting that, my 4.5-year-old son was actually diagnosed with cancer. I had a 15-month-old daughter as well. And so it kind of launched me on a very different early childhood parenting experience. And after 2.5 years, my son did die of cancer, and his sister was
so sorry.
Yes, it was not how I planned for my early childhood career to go, but with the loss of her brother, my daughter actually said to me at the age of 3.5, "Mommy, half of me is gone." So it just really was something that I was so deeply aware of from the beginning, was this idea of how young children grieve so deeply. And that's been my mission now with Good Grief Parenting for the last more than 20 years. And so that's what brought me to you today, is just all of the things I've learned that most of us as adults don't even really think about, which is how those really little ones grieve.
There's stages of grief for adults. I talk about the stages of grief, but how does it differ with children? Is there a difference in the different stages?
Well, I really want to debunk that idea of stages, because that's really a misused concept. It is so common, Lisa, everyone talks about it. In fact, when my son died and I had to face this grief, I didn't know anything about grief. And I had this little child who clearly was grieving with me and had a husband who was grieving, and I didn't know how to do it or how to be in others with it. And people talked to me about the stages of grief, which I had never heard about before. And I didn't do any of that. And so I actually felt like, oh my gosh, I'm doing grief wrong. How can I help my daughter? I'm not doing this right. Well, I have since learned that those things that we call the stages of grief actually never were the stages of grief. They're the stages of dying. And they were identified by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross when she was working with and studying adults who they themselves have had a diagnosis of impending death, a fatal diagnosis. And so it's the stages. It's intended to be what people might experience when they learn that they themselves are dying. And that made more sense to me.
Oh, okay.
But many people, including psychologists and people who, work with people who are grieving, talk about these stages. And I just really want your listeners to understand that these are not stages of grief, even though they're used that way. And grief doesn't really go through stages. It can be, it's more of a process that you go through, that you go through and you circle back through some of those emotions. And certainly many of those emotions can be parts of it. As for children, which was your question, they experience grief in many ways as adults do. They experience the absence of, well, I deal with the loss of a loved one and specifically the death of a sibling or a child. But of course, there are many other losses that children experience, and some of them aren't even, the death of a loved one. It might be divorce that causes them to lose the family they knew and maybe less of a relationship with one parent, loss of a pet, moving away, like in the movie Inside Out, where Riley is grieving her familiar neighborhood, that's all grief. And the way that kids experience it, because they don't have the words and they don't have the past experience, it really was pretty amazing that my 3.5-year-old daughter could state it the way she did, that half of her was gone, because she hadn't had grief experiences before. She was just telling me how it felt to her. And often kids don't have the vocabulary or the experience. And so you're going to see their grief in ways that may not look like grief. They may be, more irritable, or they may be very, very quiet and fearful. Many kids, like my daughter, work through their grief through play. So sometimes adults will say, well, I don't think they're really, feeling the loss. They seem to be doing okay. They're just playing. Well, play is how children process a lot of hard things and confusing things that happen to them. And so with children, rather than looking for signs that they're grieving, I just encourage people to know that if your family has experienced a really significant loss, it is affecting your child and they are grieving. If there was someone in the household that is now gone, they know that person is gone. They miss that presence, and they may not, be crying a lot. My daughter didn't cry. That wasn't something she did a lot of. She really worked it all through with her play. So that's the main difference, is that it's not as visible. Many of the feelings are the same, but kids don't know how to articulate them, and they don't really understand what those feelings are the way we do as adults, because we have more experience.
That is really incredible. She was able to articulate it in that way. My husband and I actually, before I came upstairs, we were talking about how we have a 3.5-year-old now, and she, my family's French, and so one day I had her watching a French show, and then she told me she wanted to watch it in English, but she didn't know how to say, like, oh, I want to watch it in English, so she said, I want to watch it in ABCs. So it's just kind of like, it's funny how kids really find different ways of, but they still get their point across. They can still they can still make you feel what they feel. Just, that's amazing that she was able to, and that she felt safe enough to, safe with you, safe enough to share that with you. That's great too. About a year ago now, so we had to put my cat down. So my daughter she was only 2.5, and it was just supposed to be a routine follow-up visit, and we ended up I had to put down my cat. And so I came home, without Noodle. And my husband and I didn't really know how to bring it up to Lily. We were going to just, I told him, I said, let's just wait until she brings it up. Like if she wonders, oh, where's Noodle or whatever, then we can have a talk with her. But I don't want to force anything on her right now, like she's having fun, she's playing. I don't want to be like, oh, hey, guess what? Right. Yeah. So we waited. And I noticed actually in like the next few weeks after that, she didn't appear sad, but she she liked to pretend to be a cat for a while. And so I recognized that as that's how she was coping with it, she became a cat herself. And so she would meow at me, and I would call her Kitty Lily. Because I recognized that she was processing it, and she still, she didn't really understand the concept of she's not coming back. Right. I think she was still a little too young to understand that. But we told her, she was very sick and she wasn't going to get better. And so, but I thought it was interesting how she just was, all of a sudden she decided she wanted to pretend to be a cat one day. And I was like, oh, okay. So I just went with it because that's what she needed in that moment. So
yeah. And
but yeah, it's interesting.
They do find their ways, and that just brings up a couple of things. And one is that sometimes when they ask us things or they say things around the circumstance that's created the grief, we may sort of assume that we know what they're wanting to know, or we may think that we know how they're processing it. And it's just important to know that they're doing their own thing. They're like the ABC's comment that you made was kind of what brought this to mind for me, is that that's a very literal description of what's different about the two shows. And she really tapped into that, but you needed to understand that that's what she was referring to. And when children talk to us about grief or other things that they're experiencing, if we don't understand what they're asking or referring to, it's important to ask them for, what do you mean by that? Or why are you asking me that? Or why are you saying this? With the kitty cat being a cat thing, it was just really so clear that was what she was doing. And one other thing that you bring up is just that idea of how we tell them that someone or the beloved pet has died. And we do need to keep reinforcing for them that the fact that they died, and I really recommend using that word because it's the only word that accurately tells children what happened. They don't understand what death is. They're not going to understand it really till they're 5 or 6, what death is. But we still have the opportunity to start teaching them about it and saying, death is when your body stops working. What was the cat's name? Did you tell me?
Noodle.
Yes. Noodle's body stopped working, and she can't meow anymore. She can't jump on your bed anymore. She can't play with you anymore, and we're not going to see her anymore. She died. Her body stopped working. They're going to have to process that. They're going to ask you about it as they grow cognitively through, as they grow up as a child. They're going to have more understanding of that and probably want to talk about it some more. And we're going to just have to keep reminding them. And then, the idea of someone being sick, which you mentioned, we always kind of aren't sure about that either, because we want them to know that someone's body stops working only sometimes when they're very, very sick. So we can be sick and our body will keep working. And, many times that's the case. But so we just really keep reminding them of what died means, and letting them get used to the idea that they're not going to see this person again. They'll ask us over and over again, and we'll just have to keep telling them.
Yeah, we noticed that. My husband and I noticed that about Lily, is she would keep asking kind of the same questions. And, we would tell her, like, so Noodle she was very sick and she wasn't going to get better. And we were, I looked up online because I didn't know, I didn't think that Lily we'd have to deal with this early, I guess, in Lily's life. But, so I looked it up, and I remember reading that to be direct. So we said died, we said not coming back, because I was thinking about it. And had we said, oh, she's just not here anymore, then that would have, for her, meant, oh, well, she might come back later or something.
Yes.
So I wanted to be very clear that she won't be coming back. It's hard to know like what language to use, because you don't want to like be too like dark and sad and depressing, but you also want to make sure you get the point across. So it was hard for me because I like to be gentle, and I don't, so it was hard for me. I didn't really know, but especially because it was such a surprise, I guess. She expected, everybody expected to me to come back with Noodle. It was kind of like brought up and, hey, you should do this. And so I was like, okay. So I didn't have time to process it myself before being home and being with Lily. And so we kind of had to process it together. Like, I feel like I processed it through helping her process it. So I don't know, that kind of, I guess it was helpful for me too, to be able to explain it in layman's terms for her, but then also it kind of helped me as well.
You touched on something so important, and that is that we as adults are uncomfortable with death. A child isn't uncomfortable with death. They haven't had the experience we have. So when we can't, it was awful for me to have to say, my son died. I didn't want to use that word to talk about what happened to him. I had 2.5 years to prepare for that inevitability. But just that language for us as adults, we know what it means. We know the finality. We know the pain that comes with the absence of this person or this pet that we loved. All of that for us is contained in that very direct language of death. It's not the same for a child. They don't have all of that. So what we're really giving them is vocabulary that's going to prevent the confusion you talked about that comes from us sometimes wanting to be more. We think we're being gentle, but we're really just not being direct and giving them accurate information. And it can create problems later. So yeah, the way you described your experience with just having to figure all of that out is what we have to go through as adults. We really have to deal with our own coping with it before we can even bring it to a child. And that really can make it hard. But yeah, being direct is so important and simple, let her ask more questions. They'll ask more questions later, but for now what you told her is just the basics, and the truth and direct, and that's what she needed. So absolutely.
Yeah, I think we handled it. Well.
I do too.
Yeah, she's finally, I think now she's done with like asking again and again. But of course I know that, grief comes and goes, and they say grief is an ocean. And so like I'm ready though now for like the next time she comes to me with it. I won't be as like, oh, I don't know what to, like I'll, I can't imagine what you were going through while you're also trying to like, shepherd your daughter through it. I mean, how is that? If you don't mind me asking.
That is the challenge. And the word that always comes to mind for me with adults and grief is that it's intimidating. We don't know how to do any of it, and we're so afraid of doing it wrong. And with children, in addition to being direct with what we tell them, the other thing is to go through it with them. We don't need to protect kids from pain, from our own pain or their pain. Right. And I think we feel like we need to, like we have to protect them somehow. And that means I can't be sad. With me, Deanna and I were both deeply grieving and missing this person. And, Dad was too. We were all in this grief together. And one of the best things that I learned in that situation from the grief support group in the hospital that we attended was just the idea of letting your child know your grief. And And just again, being direct, I'm really missing David today. I'm missing, one time I said to my daughter, she saw me being really sad, and I said, I'm just really missing David today. And my belief is that we're going to see David again. I'm a Christian. I believe I know where he is and that I'm going to see him there. I also believe that his spirit is a presence with us in a way. And so I was saying to her, I miss that he's not here to give me hugs, because of course we would always feel like he was here with us in spirit. I miss that he's not here to give me a hug, that he's not physically here. And she said, oh, Mommy, he still hugs me. So she had her own experience with her brother of feeling that he was still able to hug her, but she knew my grief when I experienced it, what they learn when they see us having a grief that maybe they don't exactly share. You're being a role model for her about how grief can feel with someone that we're really close to. You're obviously sharing memories of her with her about your grandpa and just telling her about him. You're giving her that history and that legacy, and you're sharing with her that important relationship and how happy it made you and how his being dead is sad for you. These are all parts of what we're going to share with kids. And I say childhood is the best time to learn about grief. You didn't want Lily to learn about it quite as soon as she did when Noodle died, but she did, and they do. And then we help them with it, and she's able to watch you, and she's learning from all of this healthy ways, and you're teaching her really healthy ways to process grief and to live with it, because it's part of our lives. And so for me, I just really did feel, because I didn't know how to do it, it was very good for me to go through this grief support group at the hospital and to learn that I shouldn't worry about my daughter seeing my grief. And that, so when I work with families, I just say, it isn't either or. It's important for you to take care of your own needs. That was an important part for me. At the same time, because I was in this field of early childhood, I think I was more focused on her needs than I would have been otherwise. And you can do both at the same time. And that's just what parents need to know. You don't need to put your own needs aside for your child, and you don't need to hide your grief from them. It's a family experience, and you're going to have your really bad days, and your child can deal with that. You can help them understand that, and they don't need to be protected from it. Obviously, and this is just the one caveat, obviously, if you are so utterly devastated that you have trouble functioning, that you have trouble, that you can't stop crying, that you're really, really broken, which certainly can be a possibility, that's the kind of grief where you really are going to want to get some professional support, and you are going to want to find ways to help your child be shielded from some of the worst of it. Because the other part of what they experience when we are grieving is a fear that, I don't know if Mommy can take care of me anymore. She is, she's not able to make dinner. She's so sad. She cries. That's scary for a child. So they need our reassurance that we can still take care of them. Yes, I really am sad. And I really cried hard today, didn't I? That's because I was really sad, but I'm still here, and I'm still able to take care of you. And we're gonna get through this. We're gonna feel better sometime, just not right now. So some of those kinds of assurances are important too.
I guess when I was a child, I was protected from a lot of stuff, but that means that I also didn't experience a lot of things. I didn't learn how to cope with my feelings and things like that. So definitely, I think it's really important to show our kids how to cope with stuff, and show our kids that sometimes it's hard, but it'll be okay, and everything will be okay.
If we're not exposed to any of this as a child, it's not doing us any favors, because we're not having opportunities to learn the reality of some of the challenges of life that we will face at some point, and we're not learning how to cope with it. Everything that I teach families, parents in Good Grief Parenting to help children who are grieving is just good parenting for every single child, whether they've had a huge loss in their childhood or not. And you're absolutely right to help kids learn what emotions are, and that they are all a part of our existence as a human, and we can manage all of them, is so important. So yeah, I love that you are giving that to Lily and others who listen to your program, and that you're so aware of that, because that's really, as you say, that really is the whole key. And that again also addresses the fear of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. If we're just being honest about emotions with all of the good and the bad, we don't try to make kids feel better. That's another thing adults do, is we never want kids to feel bad. Well, you know what? Sometimes you just feel bad, and it's okay. You don't have to feel better. When we try to make kids feel better anytime they don't, we're not teaching them to be happy. We're teaching them that when they don't feel good, they need to put that feeling away and not acknowledge it and not deal with it, because the adults don't want to deal with it. So yeah, all of that is emotional intelligence.
The Imperfect Moms Club is brought to you by...
Did you know Geico's now offering an extra 15% credit on car and motorcycle policies? That's 15% on top of what Geico could already save you. So what are you waiting for? Your teenager to help around the house?
Okay, Mom, I emptied the dishwasher, vacuumed the basement, and folded the sheets out of the dryer.
Wait, what?
Oh, and next, I'm going to clean Mitten's litter box.
Are we in some kind of prank show or something? That's a camera, isn't it?
There's never been a better time to switch to Geico. Save an extra 15% when you switch by October 7th. Limitations apply. Visit geico.com for details.
Hey, my friend, I just wanted to pop in for one quick second and just ask you if you wouldn't mind sharing a screenshot of the show right now on your social media. If you would do that and post it to your Instagram stories, to your Facebook stories, or something like that, and tag us, that would help our show so much. The best advertisement is by word of mouth from our listeners just like you. If you found an episode that you truly love and that was helpful for you, or that just made you laugh along with us, please share that with your family and friends. We want to grow our community, and the only way to do that is with your help.
This is the Imperfect Moms Club on PEN. Get in touch with the show through the PEN listener hotline at 833-PODS-NET. That's 833-763-7638. And now, back to the Imperfect Moms Club on the Podcast Entertainment Network.
So your experience, I mean, obviously wouldn't be the same, but it resonates with me because my mom lost her brother when she was 17. It was an accident. My mom lost her brother, and I guess because I didn't know her back then, obviously, because she didn't have me until she was 30, I didn't really know how she went through that, and I don't know how my grandmother dealt with it either, because thinking about my grandmother lost her son, and, but my mom, I can tell she still really, really struggles with it. I don't think that she ever really allowed herself to feel it and to move on from it. But my grandmother, I remember growing up, my grandmother was able to kind of, it seems like she was more able to put her stuff aside and kind of show me the emotional support that I needed. So my question is how, because your daughter is a separate person and she has her separate feelings and she's also grieving, but how are you able to separate? How are you able to be there for your daughter, even though you were also feeling, your strong feelings. The strength that you have and the strength that my grandmother had, I just can't, it's incredible.
You just have to, Lisa. People will say to a grieving parent or a grieving person, but in our case, your grandmother's and mine, a grieving parent, you're so strong, or they might use words like that. I don't like for people to tell me I'm strong. They can, but to me, that's not what it is. What it is, do you expect me to become a puddle on the floor and just not be able to cope? We have to cope with a lot of difficult things, and we just do it. And you would do it too if you had to. And that's, parents will do it when they have to. The other piece of it, and where I thought you might be going, and maybe it is sort of where you were going because you know the work I do, is when my daughter lost her brother, they were so close, and they were just, they just adored each other. And I knew when her brother died that she would grow up without a sibling, and without a sibling that she was just so close to. And when she said half of me is gone, I knew that was a true statement, that 3.5-year-olds, children in their really early formative years and beyond, even your mother's age, their identity is really entwined with their sibling. There's the sibling relationship has a connection that I don't think people think about. When my son died, everyone knew I had had a child die, and they thought that's the worst possible thing. They didn't know, they didn't even think about, some people did, but most people didn't think about Deanna and what it felt like for her to have lost her brother. I knew she had lost half of herself. And so I was really focused. And that's why the work I do with early childhood, parents of early childhood age children, my main focus is on that bereaved sibling, because they have that connection, even if they didn't spend a lot of years with this sibling. And certainly she did.
Right.
And when I work with families now, she's 26 now. This happened my son died in 2000, so 23 years ago almost. I've had the benefit, that's what you want to call it, of seeing her grow up with this loss through all of her, through the middle school years and her college years and all of these milestones in her life, where the fact that she'd had a brother that she wasn't able to grow up with, who had died, kind of came front and center and really impacted her. So I think that bereaved parents, in a sense, get much more support than bereaved siblings. And with your mom having lost her brother at the age of 17, however many years ago that was, there was very little support and even acknowledgement, I think, of her loss. So she didn't have the opportunity to really process it or to be validated as a griever. And yet that sibling relationship, was he an older brother or a younger brother?
He was 2 years older. So they were very close. They were best friends. Yeah.
Yes. And as teens, losing your big brother, losing any sibling, but and I look at Deanna and David's relationship. He was her big brother, and that relationship, he's her hero, he's her champion, he fights for her, all of these things. And so, for me, I always felt her loss more than I felt my own. I really did. And I don't know if it was, now that I'm talking on podcasts and meeting with people and talking more about this, which I've been doing for the last couple of years on these public forums, sometimes some of the podcast hosts will want me to talk. They want to focus on David. They want to talk about my loss. And then I really tap into this place that I think in some ways, I mean, I very much allowed myself to grieve and grieved in healthy ways when I lost him. But at the same time, I was very focused on her as his sibling and the losses that she had, that she made so clear to me in the beginning. But I think the big answer is, or 2 points to that are, as a mom, you're going to really be thinking about the other surviving children that have this loss too, because you love the child who died. You love the child who's living without that child. Your grandmother must have just, I mean, we're twice heartbroken for the loss of our child. And then to see her 17-year-old daughter, suffering from the death of her big brother. You just do what you have to do. And it sounds like your grandmother had just some really, a lot of wisdom and a lot of just compassion that was able to help her get through it. And one of the ways that all grievers survive the best is by finding ways to give to someone else, even out of your own pain, and just to share that compassion that you gain from it with other people. So it sounds like your grandmother was able to do that as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting for me because I mean, obviously I wasn't there when all of that was happening. So I just saw where they were at when I was here, when I was, growing up. So I don't know what they had to go through to get to the place where they were when so my grandmother was she was a second mom, honestly. I grieved. I'm still grieving really hard. I mean, I don't think I'll ever stop being devastated that she's gone. I see losing my grandmother as like, I lost a mom, because she was the one that I spoke to about everything. And she, my grandmother, it was almost like she didn't have a life. Like when she was talking to me about my stuff, she was just focused on me and what I was going through and all of that, stuff. And so, it just, through therapy of my own and through talking about her, I was just curious about, how was she able to get to that point where she was able to put all of her stuff aside and just, but now that, from talking to you, I could see that it helped her to she kind of poured that into supporting her grandchild, which that's really, it's a nice thing to think.
And I'm sure she did her processing in the earlier years, because everyone does need to do that. I mean, if I had just if at the time of the death, I had just focused on Deanna and not done anything with my own grief, that would not have been a good situation for either one of us, for Deanna or me. And so I'm sure your grandmother did do her own work, did work through it in a healthy way in order to be able to give that to you. And the other thing I would say about grief is that even when a person is doing well and moving beyond, and I'm clearly able to focus on other things now and supporting other people, but I still have my temper tantrum moments where I just really want my son back and I want my daughter to have her brother. And I just don't want to be this bereaved mom who doesn't have her firstborn child. And, I still carry the grief, but it does change. It does evolve, and we do get to the place where we assimilate it into the way that we're living, and hopefully we assimilate it in ways that enrich us, which a lot of people can't imagine that grief can enrich us. But that's why I call my program Good Grief Parenting, because all of those things you were talking about, the emotional intelligence responses to how we process difficult events and emotions, all of that is is making grief something good because it's a growing experience for us. That's why I call it good, not because it feels good or because we want to have grief, but because we can learn some really good things about how to have an enriched life by allowing ourselves to go through grief and cope with it in healthy ways.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Imagine a world where potty training is fun, fast, and easy. Only pull-ups have Disney graphics that fade when wet to teach big kids to stay dry. So they're motivated to keep the music going.
I'm a big kid now.
Did you know Geico's now offering an extra 15% credit on car and motorcycle policies? That's 15% on top of what Geico could already save you. So what are you waiting for? Your dentist to actually believe you?
And you're flossing every day.
Absolutely.
Great. And you're cutting down on your sweets?
Of course.
Wonderful. Then I don't even need to look in there.
Great. See you in 6 months.
There's never been a better time to switch to Geico. Save an extra 15% when you switch by October 7th. Limitations apply. Visit geico.com for details.
Enjoying this show? Be sure to check out all the shows across the Podcast Entertainment Network, where there's a show for every interest. Visit www.podcastentertainment.com to browse through the full collection of shows. And now, back to the Imperfect Moms Club on the Podcast Entertainment Network.
It makes me really sad for my mom, I guess, because I don't think that she ever really processed it. I feel like she was more of the avoiding type, so she kind of avoided the pain any way she could. And, so I could see that she still really struggles as if, it's still so fresh and it's still, so I don't know, growing up, I guess I always kind of wish that I could help her, but I don't have the same experience, so I can't, I can't help her, and I don't know how. And so I don't know, it just, it's sad. But
I actually do have a suggestion for you since you bring this up, and that because you're right. I doubt that she had anyone coming along. I mean, her grandmother, of course, shared the loss, but I doubt that she had anyone coming alongside her, asking her to talk about it, helping her through it, giving her a place to voice. I mean, there's so much anger and like my temper tantrum moments, the things that are lost that we can never get back, that, griever and a sibling so often doesn't get a chance to talk about. I'm actually, my grief credential is from the Grief Recovery Institute that has the grief recovery method and has a book of that name. And the process is to help anyone who's grieving any kind of loss, not even always death of a loved one, but to help them come to terms with this loss. There are ways to come to terms with it and work through it in this grief recovery method. And this is a process that is effective for people who are grieving, as I said, lots of different kinds of grief, and even griefs that they may have carried for many, many years. And many people who go through this grief recovery method, it's an 8-week program that you can go through with a certified grief recovery specialist like myself or others all over the country, because we like to do this process in person. And so she can visit the Grief Recovery Institute website and find someone near her who could go through this process with her. And it can be people who have carried a grief for 60 years or more can really find some peace with it by going through this process. So that's something for her to look into, or for you to look into for her, the Grief Recovery Institute.
Yeah, I would absolutely. I'm going to look into that for her. I just I worry that she won't want to. is the
and we can't
issue.
make them.
But,
yep, we can't make them.
Yeah. But I'll definitely look into it. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to. I just got so focused on my mom there for a second.
Well, that is important. I mean, the thing that you're bringing up, which I think does tie into this, Lisa, is that when we experience grief at whatever age, which is why my daughter's statement was so important to me at 3.5, it's like, okay, she's got her whole lifetime ahead of her and half of her is gone. I've got to do something about that. It's not okay. Yeah. Of course, she will grow up, but how? And, do I want to leave it to chance, or do I want to help her grow up whole and happy? And of course, I wanted to help her grow up whole and happy. And I couldn't find anyone to tell me how to do it, which is why my program is so important to me, because there aren't programs like mine out there. Your mom, I could never, if I'd had more children after David died, I would not have been the same parent ever again that I was before he died. Your mom, because she lost her brother at the age of 17, was a very different adult and parent to you than she would have been if she hadn't had that loss. Yeah. And I have met other adults who, who lost a sibling, and it was never dealt with for them because we don't help siblings with it, or didn't. We're much better now. And that is important because it does ripple through the family. What you got from your mom is different than what you would have gotten from her had she not had a brother die, or had she had more support as a grieving sibling. So it is really important. And I think, for adults listening to this conversation between you and me, what they can draw from this is how important it is to just address that grief that young people, whether they're 3.5 or 17, or even, a young adult, not to mention older adults who lose siblings, but in those developmental years of becoming who we're going to be, it's really important for young people and children to get support for the death of a sibling, as well as, other deaths.
Yeah. And I mean, you're right. We don't think about it. I mean, I didn't even really think about it. And now I feel really bad because obviously when I thought about my grandma, I thought about my grandmother's grief, and I was like, oh my God, like, cause I'm a mom. And so I can't, think about losing one of my children. I can't, but, I hadn't really thought too much about, my mom's side of it, how much harder it could be potentially for her to grow up without, this person that she's so connected to. Yes. Yeah. That's a lot. Cause I feel like, I've mentioned this to a couple people. I feel like I didn't really know my mom. And I say that because obviously I knew her, but I didn't really know who she was before. So it kind of made me feel like I never really met her, like I just, I just had this version of her that went through this big loss, but she was, she was a person before that, and she had likes and dislikes and all these things and things she liked to do and hobbies and, and so, I don't know. It's just, I hope that someday we can kind of get it all sorted out and but I'm not sure. We'll see.
Yeah. And it's never too late to open the door for conversation. And as you say, we can't, when someone is grieving, especially if they're in a pattern of grieving because of the support they did or didn't have. And, sometimes when we've had a loss for many years, it's hard to think of doing it differently or seeing it differently or processing it differently. And no one who wants to help can force that process, but sometimes just opening the door. And that's what I say about talking to children, because one of my biggest pieces of advice with young children is not to avoid it. And I was just actually writing a blog before I hopped on here with you for early childhood providers and how we sometimes don't want to talk to kids if we know there's something going on in their family that might be affecting how they're behaving. We don't know whether we should talk to them. And I just really recommend that for anyone who's grieving, because we as support people often don't know what to say, so we don't say anything. And that's not giving the griever, whoever they may be, the opportunity to talk about it if they want to. And so I just really recommend with young children, for example, with your grandpa, and it sounds like you've talked to Lily about that, but if you hadn't and she was seeing you be sad, you might ask her, if, is there anything you want to know about grandpa, or is there anything you're wondering about? I told you my grandpa died, or Noodle didn't come home. Do you have any questions about that? Is there anything you're wondering about, or is there anything you're worrying about, or just, letting them know it's okay to talk about it. And they may not want to, and that's okay. The point is not that they do it. So even with your mom, just telling her that you've kind of learned, you're realizing some things you hadn't realized, and you're thinking about it. And, if she ever wants to talk to you, just opening the door could make a difference for her at some point, or maybe not. But I think we just need to let grievers know that we're there for them. We can't fix anything, but we can be there and we can listen. I just really encourage adults who need to deal with it with young children to not be intimidated by it, and to know that death and loss, kids do feel these uncomfortable, not good feelings. They feel anger too, and other feelings that aren't comfortable, and we help them with those. We can help them with grief as well. And the best thing we can do with children is help them understand this feeling when it comes into their childhood, as opposed to not knowing what to say. And we don't have to say a lot, but be sure that, as you said, that what we give them is honest information, not something that's, we think feels better or is easier for us to say, and let them ask more questions and just be open in the conversation, because kids have a lot of time to grow up after the loss and ask more questions and learn more things. And the biggest gift you can give them is to be open with them about it, and to be, to allow them to have their feelings and then help them with those.
If anybody wants to kind of look you up, or if they have questions, if they want to get in contact with you, how would they do that? They
can find me at anything Good Grief Parenting. That's my website. That's me on Instagram. That's my link in Linktree. So just I am goodgriefparenting.com. And I do invite anyone to make an appointment just to talk with me if you want to just pick my brain about a few things. And you can do that from my website or from Instagram. You can use my Linktree link to set up that appointment. So just remember Good Grief Parenting.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Well, I'm so happy that we were able to chat today.
Yes, me too, Lisa. Thank you for the invitation.
Want to get in touch with the show? Email us at imperfect@podcastentertainment.com.